Bome ništa, rumba, rumba, rumbala, ni oluja, niti kiša, rumba, rumba, rumbala. Ne se ova pjesma čuje, aj Karmela, aj Karmela. Tamo srce pobjeđuje, aj Karmela, aj Karmela. Gdje se ova pjesma čuje, aj Karmela, aj Karmela. Tamo srce pobjeđuje, aj Karmela, aj Karmela.
This is a circle of our talks regarding several production in our project Peripheral Visions, and after 11 years we published a book which is strongly refer still in a situation of specific situation in an experience of facing the reality on historical regression. And I think that this aspects of and significant talking between Želimir Žilnik and Boris Budin was really strong impact and inspiring source for Budin's texts in the book. So we come out with English edition with the text of with the title "Past: An Introduction to the Problem," and basically Budin mentioned in the preface, or even on the first edition, then this is not a book about the past; it's an introduction to the problem called past, and this is something that we could actually also refer on geopolitical crisis presently, you know, which comes up with a very fresh, actual, you know, moment with this source, what we actually come up. But anyway, I would like to. This is some kind of the main kind of framework, but I'm very glad that we are talking now. Referring to your project and your volume, what you produce as a Partisan festival, and as one of the participants, I just catch a part of this atmosphere, what you produce, and I'm really glad that I've been a part of it, and I would like to invite you to share with us in this podcast some kind of approach or some specific points of view, what you're actually going to rise with it, and specifically kind of a congregation with the content of the book of Budin and Žilnik. So both of you are more than welcome. So who will be the first one?
Go.
Andrei, you want to go or I go? I don't know.
You go.
I don't
Okay,
mind. Listen, first, thanks for having us online. Last time we met in Berlin, indeed, a few months ago, was a very pleasant experience. I would say, perhaps the difference from some of past experiences was much broadly conceived, so not as some kind of academic community talking about Yugoslavia, kind of this, you know, umbrella of Yugoslav or post-Yugoslav studies, but actually very much in the core of what you just said, that was Budin's conception or problematizing what the past is. How to, let's say, defragment certain emancipatory dimensions, points from the past that can perhaps trigger something in our present, or rather kind of open certain sense of futurity. So because this investment or engagement in the past, be it Yugoslav, fascist, partisan, or communist, it's not there as a mere academic curiosity, but rather as a kind of invitation to kind of re-engage in our present. So this was one of the basic idea. I mean, Andrei, correct me also, if I'm wrong, but also that's why we wanted to invite, people that are kind of engaged, from political organizations or NGOs to people that are within the art projects that are working with partisan archives, museums, and those people, that are into critical research. So there was this, we tried for certain intersection between art, theory, and politics, and hoped that this festival will be like a small kickoff that might, infect other people or groups to maybe do something similar in future in other cities as well. Because, like, why to do partisan festival in Berlin? Right? It's not something self-evident, even though you can say that Germany had politically, a strong anti-fascist tradition. But whenever you speak with like German comrades about anti-fascism, for them that's very much a reactive formation. So you intervene to prevent fascism, like historical or neo-fascism, to expand itself, to threaten democracy, let's say. And then and here we come to this kind of differentiation of the past. The anti-fascist partisan experience was always, like not just like this kind of negative struggle against the fascist occupation, but it was also transformative, revolutionary, culturally, politically, and then also socioeconomic struggle of the oppressed. So this is also perhaps one way to refresh or reactivate anti-fascism today. If it's going to be always just in this reactive modus, attacking extreme right-wing parties, how they expand and take on parliamentary means, then we are already defeated, so to speak. Our future is already gone. And it is only in stepping forward, so to speak, stepping in the past to reactivate, but also to think of a different world, that we can say, okay, now, like that might be a serious political alternative that people will be really mobilized with it. So in a way, Partisan Festival is then also a political project. It doesn't have this grand ambition in itself, but whenever we are speaking about this idea of the past and why it's important for today, I think that we have to be a bit ambitious.
Great.
Yeah, I would thank you, Gal, very much for this nice introduction and framing, and thank you, Zoran, for inviting us and giving us the space to maybe elaborate and expand some of our thoughts and some of our concepts, and also allowing us to maybe reflect and look back at some, because we actually didn't have, I mean, we had a private conversation about it after, sitting afterwards after the festival, but we didn't really have a chance to reflect it with a third person in this case you. So to follow on, to maybe expand this notion of temporalities, which I think is relevant also with regard to the book, as it opens up this idea that the past is actually a text, a hypertext that has to be deciphered and reinterpreted again and again, meaning that there is no one closed chapter of what the past is. I think that we were very much also driven by this idea that the Partisan Festival actually gives tools to understand what is the emancipatory legacy of anti-fascists, the anti-fascist struggle, the partisan struggle, socialism as such, but also to understand what are the antinomies that are immanent to the project itself, to the project of socialism. which is, I think, something that you were also struggling, or Buden and Jilnik were also struggling to in a way make visible and to shed a new critical light on this specific idea that we should not glorify the anti-fascist or the socialist past, but that we have to be very critical about all the paradoxes that actually in the second generation with the bureaucrats actually then led to nationalist formations, which eventually then destroyed and made Yugoslavia collapse. So having said this, what I feel that was very important for Gal and me when we were conceptualizing the festival, and also we need to mention Dirk Cislak, who was the host of the event, who actually approached us. So we kind of did it with him also. What was important for us was this idea that actually we are confronted with a hybrid temporality, a dialectical temporality, meaning that if you want to understand the presence, we have to go back to the past, but at the same time, this is where I think our projects and our ideological struggle is where it differentiates itself from right-wing attempts, is that we in a way search for this futurity. So we are actually looking for the open horizon of potentialities. It is not about this glorification of the past, which you have, for instance, or whenever I think of this idea of temporality and the difference between how temporalities are mobilized in the left political activism and in the right political activism, you see that there is this crucial difference, that the right is activating it in a sense that they are looking back to some mythological past, they are building churches, they are all about archaeology, and this necessarily leads to some sort of anachronism, where actually you are disconnected from the presence and also from the future. Whereas when we look to the Yugoslav communist or socialist and partisan past, I think what is crucial there is to understand this idea of futurity, this breaking into another dimension of time, which then, of course, is also a politics of hope. And to think with Ernst Bloch, or this utopian idea, which I always lack in the right-wing discourse dealing with the past. So, and in that sense, for me, this is one of the crucial problems where I think our intention and what we were striving to achieve with the Partisan Festival intersects with the idea of the book. Does this make sense?
Yeah, makes sense, of course. And I would like just to add and to continue this kind of conversation, because what you mentioned with the festival, it's actually very closely linked into the strategic, position what we are doing in Serbia. And basically, it's a question of what's the role of the art production in general, in common, situation in the world, and specifically what you mentioned now, then how it's reflect, and then we could actually agree all together. Then we are living in this extremely strong disintegration of society in war and crime in the present moment, and it's a question which kind of engine, or how we could actually explore this machinery, which could be strong to resist authoritarian canonization of and institutionalization of cultural practice, and how to push, forward. And I think this is something that we have to keep it, this dimension of producing utopian, possibilities, and which has to be somehow common practice for possible future steps. And in terms of that, I would like to ask you a bit more about this aspect of partisans as a guerrilla, as someone who is actually stepping out of the mainstream, and how it's actually resonate in your concepts for the future.
I would just like to add something small to your just point in the beginning of like the reply, and also to the book of Buden and Zilnik, and this there is also this a bit of meta discussion how you access the past, right? Through which kind of medium, or which kind of, let's call it, is it political, or is it cultural history? Is it like, there is this famous discussion of black movies itself, right? How the black came to play or to mark this new Yugoslav film, where this Jovicic, the party intellectual, was saying this interesting modernist thought, right? That the past will not be remembered by daily politics or kind of this agenda politics, what like from year to year, but by works of art, right? So it's like kind of this modernist claim that is very much different to this kind of totalitarian, kind of fear of there was no freedom and so on. So that's kind of a bit demystifying that part. But at the same time, if you look for last 10, 15 years, that a lot of people, how they access then Yugoslavia in a slightly more positive ways was through monuments. So kind of these partisan revolutionary monuments, right? Kind of because they are so aesthetically appealing. So we had this quite interesting discussion with Sanja Horvatincic, who was also present at the festival, who also problematize, right, some of these monuments for their abstract kind of formal features. So all kind of fantasies can translate into this work of art, because it's not just monument, it is a kind of a work of art or part of the movement that tried to kind of formalize kind of revolution or what partisan liberation was, right? At the same time, it became like such a strong aesthetical fascination as some kind of reinscription of this modernist discourse in today context, which took like this more sharp edges, or like this intersection between politics and art out of the picture. So nobody was anymore, obliged to even think what was communism or problems with socialism, antinomies, but rather focus on art as something that is almost transhistorical, right? So that's I think one fascinating part that kind of runs through, what people that are interested in art in a bit more complex way are doing, that are not doing just like art historian perspective, right? But more some kind of creative archive plus political contextualization, like what passed, how it speaks, or why it was silence, or why it is silence today, and some other points are highlighted. So if that kind of brings me to the partisan figure, right, to certain kind of guerrilla, or kind of the methodology, like I would say for Zilnik, he's not very famous for partisan films, right? Like he made you know, this on the Dragica of, you know, the witness that was like 100 years old already, like one of the first women Istrian anti-fascists that fought, you know, before Second World War already and during. And this Ustana Kujawsko uprising in Yazak. So these are like two partisan that you could call. But for me, it's like his method, you know, like how to make films is like in a partisan way. So in a partisan way, that means it's, you know, it's engaged in form and in content. It is not, it is like creating alternative world on the way when it's like, you know, creating this film. They're kind of engaging people inside of this process, changing also himself. So it's like not only the 11 theses of Feuerbach, how to change the world and not just to reproduce, represent it, but produce it, but also the third thesis of Feuerbach is very important for Zilnik. So it's like how the educator, the avant-garde or the avant-garde filmmaker is also educated himself through the process, or hits, like what Andre was saying before, like these antinomies, right? Or kind of limitation of like that art can change the world. It's like also politics, the daily politics is not changing the world, like the way how the partisan experience, like the radical transformation of the world is. So yeah, I would say that this interest in research, in to follow up, you know, how on different levels, in different fields, people or you know, collectives are still working in a partisan way. Something that was, you know, kind of fascinating me, but I was also extremely happy that in last 10, 15 years, in the post-Yugoslav context and stretching beyond it, there has been quite a few artists, art collectives, theorists, even, you know, political groups that align themselves with certain partisan experience that is not nostalgic. So that does not freeze in certain past, and it's like completely self-referential and happy with that past, conserving it in a small box that is never opened again, but rather something that, you know, like in a Benjamin sense, can put the shrapnels of emancipation on very different contexts. So that is not strictly just Yugoslav or what you say. It's like how to think about the role of politics and art today in the world that, you know, even something before so sacred in the West as academic freedom is being prevented, curbed, censored, taken away. So it's like this discussion on Zilnik and also this criticism of certain censorship and authoritarian pushes in the early 70s can tell us also a little bit about how to fight in a partisan way today, because things are becoming much more authoritarian, much faster than we would expect. You know, now it seems there is a very strong normalization of war, right? So in terms of war, where are these new partisan? Yeah, it's a legitimate question.
Right.
Yeah, let me add to this also this idea that I think one of the really important issues that we try to put up front in the with the festival, and then also I think it's very much related to the book, is this idea of also counter memories, or how do you how to narrate a past that has been obscured, omitted, that has been iconoclastically devastated, which is not only for the sake of revitalizing it, but also for really finding ways finding partisan ways to address this, what Gal was very beautifully putting it in words, normalization of war and violence, which is something that we are experiencing daily, and which at this point is also being interwoven with this whole discourse of cancel culture, of refuse or not allowing any radical critique of everything. And I think where we are lucky, as we speaking in terms of people who can read and who have this experience of the praxis groups, let's say, or the philosophy of praxis. I remember this idea that of the philosopher Guy Petrovich, that praxis is about a radical critique of everything that exists, which is already in itself a creative act, a philosophical act. And I think this comes actually from, and one research that I am keen to do is actually to establish this sort of relationship between praxis philosophy and the partisan experience, is exactly this idea that you have to be able to not take anything for granted, that every concept has to be criticized and has to be deconstructed until you then deconstruct the deconstruction in itself. So in that sense, I think that was something that the partisan method, if we can call it in that way, is something that we tried in a way to affirm, which then transcends, not in this metaphysical sense, but in a more methodological and epistemological sense. It transcends this purely Yugoslav or post-Yugoslav ambience where it kind of grew, and eventually it becomes a tool to then really dismantle and reflect on what is happening, what is going on in the world as we see it in the moment. As I'm speaking, we are confronted with at least two big wars, which, if they merge, we have a global catastrophe, which is, I think, even beyond our imagination of the Third World War. So in that sense, one of the big things, and it became actually clear to me when Gal and I met, and we kind of were a little bit thinking what is actually what we could speak today also, is this idea of an urgency of peace, which I think also, although it sounds paradoxical that you have the partisan festival, you have the figure of the partisan who has to fight, but at the same time it is about peace. So I think this dialectics is really something that is crucial for us to understand, and also in that sense, let me just maybe say this also, that this experience of Yugoslavia and the way this problem was not solved, I think is really something not of a past, but of one scenario that Europe and the world are confronted with today. So in that sense, it really has, and when I remember when I was reading Žilnik and Buden, this was something that kind of always was echoing in or resonating in my reading of their text. This idea that Yugoslavia is not the past; it cannot be confined. It's not a finished process. It is something. It is a model. It is something that we have to take that has to be taken very seriously. Exactly, because it prefigures a lot of these tensions and antagonisms that we are confronted with today.
I think if I can just add something very
Mhm.
small,
Yeah.
you know, when you were talking about these different wars, almost like kind of you know,
Proliferative wars.
when is the World War III happening? I mean, some people would say that also anti-colonial revolutions and anti-imperialist struggle in Africa, like in 50s, 60s, were already Third World War in a way. Like, but I think that because there is such a big you know, investment in defense industries, in militarizations of society, in policing of discourse, so like kind of repressive apparatus, and the old military state is totally back, that we will probably have to retroactively then reconstruct when the Third World War started. Similarly, like for Second World War, you could also say like kind of either attack of Japan or how Italian attack, right, on Ethiopia and stuff, or Czechoslovakia, or like when was this tipping point? Of course, then let's say 1939, and the attack on Poland when the West says it's enough. So it's like, is the West has to say when the war happens, or that it has to be always centered around the Europe, right? So we are here in decolonial thinking. So when the World War is World War, first and second happened because of Europe, in Europe, and so on, but with
Or
very
even-
different dimensions, right?
Yeah, or even the recent voices, then it actually comes to into this thesis, then was actually one world war, which was
Yeah.
prolonged 30
Yeah,
years.
30
And
years.
it was
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
another
So
one. Yeah.
that's like one important part of this aspect, and of course it is, and it's the same kind of question like what we were discussing with Oksana Timofeeva, when apocalypse, you know, connected to this dystopian scenario of climate changes, and you know, is going to happen. It is already here, right? The apocalyptic swings in weather and stuff, like they are already like biting from the future. But yeah, maybe the interesting part also of the piece, there's been quite a few partisan poets in Second World War that were singing not just like let's end of the war, let's end war and let's have peace, we need peace or something like that, but they were, you know, thinking and singing and writing poems from within the struggle, like as very engaged, you know, people that during the day would carry the guns and at night they would write the poems and try to educate themselves and others. So it's like kind of this really, you know, marks, you know, the kind of human praxis or praxis of self-realization of individuals and collectivity was at work then. And many of them were anti-militaristic. So it's like they would say, we fight that we never have to fight again. So it's like this idea that it is the last ultimate struggle. So this is like in Caillou, you have it in Matei Bar, you have it in many other, you know, partisan poets that would think, you know, that when you are reaching for peace, you're reaching also for social justice. And today we would say climate justice, racial justice. So you have to have this intersectional struggle that is inscribed in the project of peace, not peace as truth that is just like kind of, you know, waiting for better opportunity to attack, to conquer the other, right? So it's like we have the peace discourse has completely been evacuated and has been even, you know, by Slavoj Žižek, or, you know, even by former left, or some people saying this is like empty pacifist rhetorical gesture, like we are used with Pope. But, you know, like today, I think one of the most radical stances is to think peace, to think, society beyond the paradigm of war. I'm not talking about some kind of pacification of antagonism or conflict. I'm talking like that the peace has to be there with the idea of future if we want to, because it becomes so intensively militarized. And in times of drones, it's much more difficult to organize the partisan struggle, right? And this is like what we can see on the field in Ukraine. It's like crazy. If you look at now, drones are shooting at each other, drones that are looking for humans, and then from above in other drones are attacking those drones. It's just like, we were talking about the Terminator and the strange part of future, but it is already here.
Yeah,
So,
right.
yeah, I think that's really, really an interesting figure and provocation to thinking. I would say this: what would be a post-human partisan would look like? Would it be some kind of a Terminator? What would be the partisan? Is there something like a partisan drone?
Because I don't know what is this new film. I was just like in movies a little while ago, and there was a trailer on some robot that became emancipated from human and robotic logic and is together with nature and animals fighting for social or climate justice. So it's like the level of alienation is already so far that we have to think about robots to save us, right? It's this kind of liberal techno-utopias. Either we will conquer Mars in Elon Musk grand narrative, or this kind of survivalist, like we can go in bunkers for some time and hoard, and have Siemens for after apocalypse, right? And it will be just survival of the most fittest or the richest and so on.
But I think also this speaking of guerrilla and this idea that you have to flee into the woods, that you kind of, we would today, how is it today called, survivor, or this just this mode that you are actually renouncing urban structures, and you're kind of really an outcast. You're on the margins. You are living in very close contact with nature, meaning you're sleeping on the open, under the open sky, which is something that definitely I think can also learn from the partisans, and I think this is where you will, or you already have made some research on this idea of partisan ecology, which I think is also very interesting, because it's kind of uses the idea of the partisan not only for this militaristic struggle, but also for ecological. We had this attempt by one of the participants to think about to ask this question: is there something like a queer partisan culture as well? So, which are all the struggles, or all the intersectional aspects that I think we could mobilize the partisan figure as a hermeneutic or speculative tool, which is then, I think, also referring back to the book, where Zhilnik and Budan use the medium of cinema to then articulate all these issues around how to write, how to rewrite, how to understand, in first place, what is history in its textuality, in its materiality, iconicity, if you also want, but also in in its political apparatus, which then I think was something that inspired us very much to be unruly to the disciplinary boundaries. You know, to really kind of completely step over this idea. Okay, here we have, I don't know, philosophy, history, and art. No, we tried really to then create a diagram which, in a way, moves beyond this sort of confines of disciplines, which for me is really a partisan method.
Yeah.
That it kind of is unruly to borders, to territories. It is a deterritorialized action.
This is the fascinating part about this, you know, kind of partisan ecology, and this again, you have certain differentiation from a more conservative, nostalgic, or kind of even deep ecologist, fascist sense. You have like a strong text by Carl Schmitt, a fascist legal thinker, right, on the partisan figure that a lot of, you know, also some left theorists use, like Chantal Mouffe or, you know, some other people. There is this strong inscription when thinking about partisan in this telluric, so it's a kind of belonging to the soil, right? That kind of defines or kind of over-determines what partisan is about. And of course, you are just like one fraction out of the Blut und Boden ideology. So somebody who is, you know, kind of belonging to the Gemeinschaft, not Gesellschaft, not to the urban, but to the natural bonds where everything is more generic, more genuine, you know, kind of going to the origins of the national being. We know this Heideggerian,
mythological,
in Slovenia and Serbia, we had quite a lot of philosophers and theories that use that to very pervert political goals. And I would say that the partisan kind of this belonging, it's not that you don't belong to, but there is also this strongly deterritorializing or kind of liberation that is like kind of expanding, not in terms of empire, right? Like kind of melting pot of everything, but sustaining these differences, inequality. So there is equality of these differences, and there is a kind of invention or invention what the nature is. So it's not something pure or origin, but if you're thinking about the new world, right, and you are criticizing fascist and military apparatus like the war machine, as Deleuze and Guattari would say, then you are also, you know, on the side of nature, or kind of what Miklaus Kumel would say, you know, there is certain subjectivation that is on the side of the animal. So also the animals and the forest are taking side, taking partisan stance in the struggle against fascism. So it's interesting to see how the forest as a site of refuge becomes a primary zone of political subjectivation of partisans, of people that are there. And this is beautifully shown in Želimir Žilnik film, Uprising in Yazak. You know, the people that are not all of them were invested or in on the front of, you know, the partisans. There's a lot of people that are just like kind of supportive, but without them, the resistance would be unimaginable. Right? So these beautiful parts of collective creating history. It cannot be dominated by the party view, if you want, but also, yeah, in a way, how to integrate or connect to these experiences of ecology. So if you want to be partisan today, I mean, this is the discussion Andreas Malm is also having, you know, about the different sabotage actions against the blowing the pipelines. and the legitimacy of counter-violence against systemic violence on the one hand, and the more the guy's called Ferdinand Malcolm, who wrote a book on decolonial ecology, is also a beautiful contribution to kind of Caribbean history or counter history of emancipated slaves, Maroons, that come and create again political community in wilderness. It's not about fascination with wilderness as such, right? This is also, you could say, it's some kind of colonial imaginary, but rather like this kind of really politicization of them and in connection with nature, because something else than extractivist plantage economy, right? That kind of just like, you know, pushes the nature away.
So I would like to thank you both for your time and for your present. Glad to having you in our circle, and happy to see you very soon in some new production together.
I hope so too. It was great.
Yeah, me too. Hope to see you soon.
Ni oluja niti kiša, rumba, rumba,